way we lost
All right, you're live.
recent commission.
So this is Senate Appropriations, and we're going to take action on H125, boards and commissions. And so we have Tim Devlin from Legislative Council and Senator Rebecca White, who's here from, are you here from GovOps?
I am.
And your role on GovOps?
Yes.
So if we can run through this rather quickly, and then we'll go on to miscellaneous ag subjects, which will probably keep us on the edge of our seats as well. So why don't we start with this? And
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Council. The committee has, let's see, a summary of H125 as amended by the House. That's a 4-page summary of what is otherwise a 140-page bill, which really entirely focuses on either repealing certain what could be characterized as defunct committees and boards, commissions, or prospectively repealing those. And then the committee also has access to what is, I have in my records, it's draft 3.1 of the Senate's amendment to it, when I will direct the committee's attention to what is it? It is, sorry, the second instance of amendment is really the only thing in this amendment which has any fiscal implications. This regards the Vermont Pension Investment Commission and really the commissioner's salary, which under current law, sorry, the chair of the commission, the current law is compensated from the funds of the retirement systems at a level not to exceed 1/3 of the salary of the state treasurer. The Senate GovOps committee opted to remove that and instead really say that that chair of the commission may be compensated from funds at a level as recommended by the other members of the commission and as approved through the state budget process. And I'll just pause there.
Okay, well, are we moving the cost of the state budget? Normally, the cost of BPIC has been paid by the pension entities. And so I just want to make sure, and it's been distributed across. So my question, and in the budget, we actually had to make that explicit, the cost, because it used to be embedded in the treasurer's office. So are we getting an amendment that would move the cost of the BPIC director to the general fund?
No, I believe.
I'm not clear on what the impact is. Maybe the other, I don't know. Everybody clear on that or not?
Well, I think, good point. Where's the money?
So why don't we let you answer the question?
Sure. And I don't know if I'll be able to provide you with much useful information at that point, but really as written, this actually it implies that it's really through the state budget.
We do that through the state budget. I mean, we
Sorry.
yeah, the question is, I just want to make sure and from the funds from the funds of the retirement systems. That's all I'm trying to make sure that that's the funding mechanism. We do that through the state budget process, but that's the.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to follow up. We heard from Tom Galanka, the chair, on this question because there was some concerns that this was an attempt to separate from the treasurer's office in an attempt to raise the compensation of the chair, because that is what ultimately could happen with the separation. We didn't talk explicitly about if there was a change in where the money would come from. So my understanding is there is not a change, but I'm happy to follow up with Tom Galanka and ask him to submit something if that's helpful.
Well,
I think, why don't we just take a look at that and make sure we don't.
there's also a cost in section 1, the repeal of the Government Accountability Committee, turning turning that over to the Summer Government Accountability Committee consisting of 4 members of the House and 4 members of the Senate.
I thought we got rid of GAC.
Well, they did, but they're replacing it with a legislative panel of 8 members. I'm really concerned here that if I'm reading the summary correctly, the House and Senate Government Operation Committees are taking over the role of the Government Accountability Committee. And that they're gonna be a summer meeting with 8 legislators. It's on page 1. I think that's a legislative problem.
Well, we created the GAC, and I thought the recommendation of GAC was to shut it down. And so, you're on GAC. And so my question, I guess, is clarifying, are we perpetuating something that we thought we were shutting down?
In this instance,
Yes.
now we're moving past VPIC. We heard from Representative Jessica Brumstead on this, who also had previously served, I believe. And my understanding is this is just a recommendation for them to no longer have the other body, which is not functioning anymore. Like their role has been taken over by this new organization.
But you have the Government Operations Committees in the House and Senate taking over the role. That's how I read it. If you read it correctly, it's the intent of the General Assembly, the House and Senate Committees on Government Operations should re-examine the principle of government accountability with a focus on how evidence is used to inform policy. Then in section 2A, you have a summer government accountability committee consisting of 4 members of the House and 4 members of the Senate.
Yes.
So that's what's
Yes.
taken over, and I can't support that.
I think Tim is good. Why don't we clarify this?
Maybe I can speak that a little bit more. Senator Hughes, you're right. The existing government accountability will be dissolved by this bill, and there'll be set up a temporary summer government accountability committee, or summer GAC, which will sunset on November 1st, 2024.
But how can government operations take care of all accountability of government accountability?
They're just gonna do it. They're gonna look at, we're gonna get rid of the government accountability, because all it did was meet and talked about the performance metrics that the administration was collecting. They weren't following their legislative duties really. So it's like, let's get rid of it, but what should we do for accountability instead? My understanding is the summer committee is gonna provide recommendations like, what would we do now that we've gotten rid of GAC? How will we address accountability?
And you know what I would hope that we could come up with, and that is, we should address it through the various ways the committees actually decide policy. We should be getting the data. How are our programs performing? What are the outcomes? How do we measure that? How do we get the data? And I think it needs to be integrated in the work of how we approach making decisions and how we hold whatever committee you're on, the various agencies and programs accountable. But so
Well, you can't, you're here 3 months, you can't hold the government accountable. That's the problem.
well, I know we're struggling with that.
That's really the problem. The only place you can hold government accountable is in the appropriations process, in terms of the administration. Because that's the fundamental problem with this form of government, where the legislative branch doesn't have staff to do investigations. The legislative branch doesn't have the staff to take on even impeaching the sheriff of Franklin County, for God's sakes. That's where the problem lies.
Yeah.
And as long as we're a part-time legislator, that's legislature, that problem exists unless you want to have full-time committees that can meet year-round.
Oh, I've got a like number 4 here. Mechanisms for controlling and restraining the increasing number of commissions, boards, and joint legislative committees.
Yeah, well, so we're gonna shut down joint legislative committees in order to make us less.
No, that's part of their challenge of this summer group.
Maybe I'll support it, maybe I won't, but I'm just frustrated with continued attempts to try to hold government accountable when we don't fund our legislative council, legislative investigative groups. We should be doing what the what the auditors should be doing, and we can't because we don't have the staff. I've been frustrated with this for longer than most of you, but I will say that the only effective group I've been on really continually is justice oversight, because we focus on corrections and justice issues. And it's a pretty limited thing, and we can focus on corrections, and I think they're probably the most. But it's just, I get frustrated with this issue, and I'm glad to know that they're not working, so it's a good thing to get rid of.
Yeah,
So, Senator Birchlick, do you have other observations from being a member of GAC? I think everybody sort of felt that it had great aspirations, but in reality, it wasn't, it didn't have the utility or the benefit for the time involved.
or the ability, as Senator Sears said, we couldn't really do the things that the statute said we were.
And then we have that report that comes out from the chief performance officer, and what we have in statute for outcomes actually is meaningless relative to, you know, the decisions that we make. So our efforts to get accountable, or how we put in what gets reported back to us and the data, and how we establish, if we put money into something, how do we know it got the result we wanted? And I think we do struggle with that. And then, so the question becomes one for us is, now that you've heard our frustration, what do we want to do with this bill?
I have another question about the bill, but you want to stay on that?
No, we need to move forward on it.
Kick that can now.
So, Senator Berkeley.
So
Just a
the
second.
idea is to have a group work on this summer and then come back with recommendations.
I think what we're really struggling with is, if we get rid of it, is there some other, a more effective mechanism to get a sense that we're getting the accountability and the information we need to make good decisions?
Well,
There might be a way to work with the auditor's office, because as Senator Sears says, it's kind of what the auditor's office
Program
does.
office, performance office, yeah.
Well, no, the actual auditor's office.
No, but they do program
Well,
audits.
yeah.
That's
So
all.
is there a connection between this committee and what the auditor is doing? Is that helpful? I don't know, but that, I'm assuming that's something that the study committee.
Could look at.
but will the study committee also be looking at other states and how small states like not part-time legislators
Yeah.
hold government accountable?
I have some.
Well, that's one thing. What's in the rest of this?
Well, a lot of it is just the Sunset Advisory Commission, so a lot of it's cleanup and getting rid of boards and
Women,
commissions.
this is just cleanup, and where are the hot spots?
The cleanup as in repeal of,
Yeah.
almost all of it. I'd say probably 140 to 144 pages, something like that.
Not, and in committee, Senator White, did anything identified that was controversial?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to find Representative Brumstead's testimony on that section, which I could send to, which speaks a little bit. She also spoke about the ethics concerns, but yes, we actually had individual committee members also follow up with the different committees. These were all recommendations from the Sunset Advisory Committee, and you'll even notice that they recommend their own later sunset, is my understanding in the bill. Already sunsetted. And so some of the names read like they would be concerning things to end. So we had folks who called through, and each of them completed a questionnaire. And we didn't hear any big responses from any of the sunsetting groups. The Vermont Board of Health, I think, is the one with the longest amount of pages, about 75 pages.
That was the chair we just appointed, but then what the testimony was, but that's only for a short time because the board's being
Yes.
eliminated.
Yes, and we had Senator Watson also called through, I would say, the environmental related ones, to make sure that all of her concerns were addressed as well.
So Senator Berkeley, you had a question?
A question on section 137. In your summary,
Oh, yes.
the subpage 4 of the summary, it says that it wouldn't affect until June 30th, 2025, but when I read the House bill as passed, it's 2027. So I don't know if that was just an error on this, or if the Senate committee moved it back to 2025.
No, the update, that change occurred after this overview was put together.
So it is
Does
2027.
that impact you? Oh, I see. So, that's 2027?
That means yes.
Well, it doesn't affect me directly, but it affects the board that oversees.
Okay. So that is
Would
2027.
it affect poor TJ Poor?
Not really. But he used the one that filled out the
Complete the
questionnaire.
questionnaire.
Oh, he just filled it out.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions?
So on so we're sunsetting the Sunset Commission?
We've already,
You mean in here, or we already did it in another bill?
It no longer exists right now.
And is that because we didn't think this was valuable work? Because it seems like it's valuable work. They go through all these boards and things, they tell us which ones to get rid of, but they didn't think so.
I believe they were just set up with maybe 4 years to accomplish.
So they've gone through everything, and now they're like, okay, we don't need to do this for another 10 years.
I think they did manage to get through their entire list, yes.
I guess that makes sense, like maybe every 10 years you create one. Okay, I'm fine.
Other comments or questions? There's municipal ethics, that's more of a report. And money-wise, I guess we're getting it because of the summer accountability committee, which does get per diems, but that's not an impact because we're only paying, having those costs through the gap that's getting eliminated. So unless there's further discussion, maybe we could move this
I moved
bill.
it.
Yeah, I'll second that. So the only thing that we have is the expense of the.
Which is an additional cost, it's really just replacement for different.
We're getting rid of some other boards, so.
Yes. And I particularly like the charge to look at how to deal with the proliferation of boards, commissions. Could we put studies in there too?
happy to bring that amendment back to the,
And it's 4 members of the committee, the GovOps committees.
for the gap.
Second.
I believe it's 2 and 2.
7-star, I think.
The first one,
Yes.
Senator Sears,
Yes.
Senator Starr,
Yes,
Senator Weston Jessup, Senator Kitchen.
Yes.
Who has me?
Boards and commissions?
Yeah,
I don't know, is it?
anybody?
Is it under?
Who's the reporter? No, for here.
I'll report it.
Okay, Andy loves to report compacts and commissions.
You gotta catch up to all the reports that you guys have done.
All right, now we'll move on, thank you very much. We'll move on to miscellaneous ag subjects.
I can't wait.
I know, and we,
Star gonna go through it with us? I want to question Star about everything in there after Grady goes through this thing. I'm sure there's something in there that's really sneaky that we'll have to uncover.
all right.
Yeah, I worry about you and your miscellaneous bill stuff.
not my, it's the agency's miscellaneous.
So did your committee make any changes to this bill?
Made very few.
Really nothing that you.
Honestly, there were
Nothing
really
that you
only,
need.
there were three technical changes.
Yeah.
What?
There were 3 technical changes that came out of the, literally changing, the word, his or her to their a couple of
Yeah.
times, and really nothing substantive from the committee. So what this bill does is, it's interesting that you just were looking at the boards and commissions report, because I think you all know that the fairs have the agricultural fairs and field days have two sources of funding. They have the capital bill, construction, facilities grant, and then they have an operational stipend that is funded through the agency's budget, usually through the Ag Development Division. Well, they've had a stipend rule about how to award that money to the various fairs. But little did anyone know that in 2018, the boards and commissions rule repealed the authority for that rule, because that rule was adopted in the late 80s, early 90s under the Racing Commission's authority.
We got rid of that.
Right, and so.
So actually, they've been giving out money with no authority.
No.
Yes. So what H472 does in its first two sections is puts into statute the process for the award of the operational stipend. I think it's around $217,000 this year, because that's what the agency asked for, but I haven't been able to find it in either the House passed or Senate passed version because it's incorporated
I was
into.
gonna say, I bet it's embedded in a larger
Right.
appropriation.
Right.
That was right around 220.
Right. So that is the amount of money you're dealing with. What the key change here is that Ag Fair is going to be defined as an exhibition that holds that's held at least annually for 3 days, consecutive days a year.
Does that impact any fairs?
Well, that's a great question, because there are a couple of fairs previously that were only 2-day fairs, but this language grandfathers them in. If they had been receiving money under the stipend, they continue to receive money.
So we're not bouncing any.
Sure. And so the other major thing that.
Or if you do, I hope it's in Bennington.
Well, they'll beef it up to 3 or 4 days.
The other thing it does is it creates a formula for equitable distribution of these funds. That's the underlying requirement for the secretary, that the funds be equitably distributed. But they want to create some parameters, some criteria for that. So they proposed a formula that starts on the bottom of page 5 of the House passed bill, going on to page 6. Secretary determines each applicant's percentage of total fair and field days activity through a formula that equally measures each applicant's respective percentage of the total applicant. And they look at attendance, they look at premium
Did
expenditure.
you write all this from scratch?
Not all of it, I know some of it.
And some of it in pre-existing statute or?
No, some of it's in the rule
Oh,
that was gone. And so they'll look at that formula for equitable distribution, but on page 6, no applicant shall receive more than 10% of the total appropriated funds unless fewer than 10 fair associations apply. So there's about 14 right now, but some might not, because of COVID, they stopped, or because
and
some.
this is all acceptable to the Fair Association, I'm assuming,
Yeah,
Jackie
and
Folsom and.
We had them in the agency.
Okay. Right, and they obviously like the authority to legitimize the grant process.
And then section 2 is just that language I referred to earlier, that if you were eligible before, you continue to be eligible, even though you're not a 3-day fair. And so that's the one section that relates to appropriation.
Well, there's,
We only have 3 copies.
I don't need a copy.
The only other section in the bill that relates to appropriations is section 22. This is language that authorizes, well, there is authority for the Agency of Ag to order the destruction of nursery stock when it poses a threat because of a plant pest, disease, etc. And currently they're required to compensate the owners of that nursery stock when they require destruction of it. But they haven't been doing that. And
so it's just sort of like a variation of the crop damage
kind
problem.
of. They haven't been doing it, and no one's been asking, because most of these commercial nurseries have insurance. that covers this. So the agency has asked for this requirement that they compensate the owners of nursery stock that's,
Well, that should have a beneficial impact on the budget,
they probably have
on the risk.
no, because nobody's been asking
No,
for
but
it,
the-
and it's not part of.
Potential risk.
Right, yeah. And those are the two, well, the three sections, two issues that have an appropriations effect in this.
Other questions? Thank you, Mike, that's pretty succinct. Someone want to move the
I'll
bill?
move it.
Okay, our two ag vote,
For time for discussion here.
about 30 seconds.
Why, no, I'm trying to find.
You probably wanted the
There's something
apiaries
in here that he's done.
establishing an, huh?
There's something in here that he's done, and I know it.
Shipping bees?
I don't know, it says to do probably with nurseries.
Oh.
I don't know.
Keep those
I'm looking,
Licensee.
looking for, disease or infested stock. Stock sale and destruction. That's where it is.
Oh, well,
That's existing coverage.
That's where you knock it in.
all right, so I'm going to have the secretary call the roll.
First,
Let me the clerk here, sorry.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
I'm still looking.
Senator
yes.
Starr. Yes.
Although, yes.
Senator Westley, yes. Senator Kitchen.
Yes. All right, so Senator Starr is going to report on behalf. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now we're down to
We got.
amendments to
Did you
cannabis.
work on the cannabis?
I did work on cannabis.
That's coming up right away.
270?
The cannabis.
I can stick around if you want.
Yeah, we should, are you the drafter of that bill too?
I drafted one section in it. the
Michelle
agriculture.
Childs is on her way right now for 270.
So, good, because we'll just keep rolling. We were behind, now we're
Did
ahead.
you get an idea from Katie McLean when she could be finished with 217? I told her 230.
That's gonna be ambitious, we know that. So, because some of it, we need to have some calculations.
Okay.
Well, the section that I drafted does have fiscal impact
On the cannabis,
on the cannabis. Here's the report.
on cannabis? Okay, so
Here's this. Okay, here is the finance
amendment, and where's the bill?
Here's the bill. And there's a couple of different fiscal notes. 10 Barnett, data photos.
This is cannabis control board duties and members. Did that come from, through your committee then?
No, actually, I think more economic development and
Economic development.
maybe finance. Yeah.
Finance does have an amendment. So, Mike, in terms of the bill itself, you just did certain sections in drafting?
Yes, I did, and, I did oh, here it is. I did the language on how to treat cannabis cultivation as farming.
So, do you want to just come up and we'll do those sections and then, who is the, oh, here's the sheriff, okay.
Yeah, I don't see the Summit Economic Development Amendment on the website.
No, here, we've got the bill, page 270. We have the finance amendment, but we don't have the,
I mean, you can do the doc number.
Right now.
welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Well, we have two documents here so far. First is a House as passed, and then we have the finance, also an amendment that you drafted for
economic development, which is the primary one. Do you need me to give you the back number, or can you find it on?
I got it.
Okay. And so for the record, Michelle Child's Office of Legislative Counsel, and you have the Senate Economic Development Amendments, draft 2.1.
Did they do a strike call or?
They did do a strike all. It's 26 pages. I was
Oh.
assuming you just probably wanted to go to the appropriation only,
Yes.
but I'm happy to talk about
Why don't we
anything.
start with the appropriation?
Okay, so the appropriation is for $500,000 to be transferred from the Cannabis Regulation Fund to the Cannabis Business Development Fund. You'll recall that when the General Assembly set up the adult use cannabis market, and then we had some subsequent amendments in the last couple of years, we set up a social equity program. And the social equity program is to allow folks who have been disproportionately affected by the prohibition on cannabis to be able to enter the regulated market. And you set up the fund. And when you did that, you appropriated $500,000 to that fund initially, and then there was a provision in there that would have that was directing integrated licensees. So those are folks who are a licensed dispensary at the time that the act was established. If they wanted to enter the adult use under essentially a vertically integrated license rather than getting one of each individual licenses, they could do that. And they would pay a $50,000 fee into the cannabis, into the Business Development Fund. And I think Bryn Hare is probably watching on Zoom or YouTube, and she could talk to, I'm not sure how much money is in the fund now, but that's been dwindling. They've been issuing grants for social equity applicants who are getting licensed by the Cannabis Control Board. And so what Section 24 of the Senate Economic Development Amendment does is it transfers from the Cannabis Regulation Fund, which is typically made up just of fees, of license fees. But you might recall that, I think it was, I don't know if you did it this year or last year, is that starting next year, you're gonna have 2 years of the excise tax is going to go into the Cannabis Regulation Fund because it was having a hard time supporting the rollout of the program with just the fees. And so that will be bolstered by the tax money going into that fund for a period of 2 years. So it's moving $500,000 from the regulation fund, which will also be made up of tax revenue for those 2 years, to the Cannabis Business Development Fund. And then that $500,000 is appropriated from the Cannabis Business Development Fund to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to fund the technical assistance and provide loans and grants to social equity applicants.
Okay, so they're moving money around. I just want to make sure that this fits with, is there a copy? We've got,
Do you want the fiscal note?
yeah, here's the fiscal note. Because we have dealt with the whole issue around the revenues not being sufficient to support the costs of the board. And so when you're moving at 500,000 from, you said from the regulatory, is that what you said?
Right, the Cannabis Regulation Fund, which is usually just the fees, but starting for next year, there'll be 2 years of excise tax money going there. So it's gonna balloon up a little bit, and so you'll have the money in there to be able to transfer.
But it takes it out of what would have been a direct app to the general fund, which would have gone
yes.
to prevention, 30%. That's what, in the same way, that it works the same way the lab expense worked. It's just an expense against that fund. And so you're putting this ahead of the general fund and the prevention. Yes, when you're doing it out of this fund.
And Senator Harrison is the reporter from Senate Economic Development. If you wanted to hear from someone from that committee about why you chose to do that.
It's a one time.
Yes, it's one time.
The only thing that I was concerned about is exactly the impact of moving money from one fund to another relative to what we have for income, and if you move it, then what is the bottom line impact? And as Stephanie has just told us, the bottom line impact then is going to be less money available for prevention, at least for next year, right? And then, so that is inherent. They're recommending that that the shift here, and I assume that in their conversation, they weighed out the impact of, if you take the money from one fund and move it to another, what is the impact relative to the availability for prevention? I don't know whether that was part of the committee discussion. When you move money around, it has an impact somewhere, and this is ultimately the impact. Other comments or questions, Michelle?
You did the finance amendment as motion?
I did.
And is there a fiscal or a appropriation in there?
No.
No, the Senate Finance Amendment is dealing with the decoupling of cannabis and tobacco. You might recall in the BAA earlier this year, you tweaked some language to clarify that cannabis vape cartridges are not to be considered tobacco substitutes. This was something that when we had originally created the adult use market legislation, you set the taxes firmly for cannabis and cannabis products at 20%, so the 14% excise tax with a 6% sales tax. Nobody, completely separate and apart from tobacco, but then once things started rolling, there was language in the way that the definitions for tobacco that you could make an argument that it might encompass some things that were considered cannabis products. And so you fixed the vape language in the BAA, but as we were going through stuff, we thought we need to go through all the definitions in the tobacco and just clarify that when you're talking about tobacco substitutes, other tobacco products, tobacco paraphernalia, you're not talking about cannabis products. They have their own taxes that are separate than that. And so that's what the Senate Finance Amendments are doing.
Do you have any other comments?
No.
Okay, we have Senator Chapman here that your amendment, obviously that's finance, and we just had a run through.
Could say better than Michelle. I'll just say I think it was inspired to Senator McDonald had somebody with a pot shop that was selling pipes, and it wasn't clear if they should be charging the tobacco tax or the cannabis tax. So I think this language was inspired by that, and we've already got through smarter minds than I. It seems to just clarify some things.
So it looks like it's just moving money from one fund to another. That does have an ultimate impact that we just talked about. Do we want to move the bill?
I'll move the bill. Let's see if there's some questions.
No, I actually think Senator Bowski was concerned about the social equity. And I suspect there'll be questions on the floor that fund is dry up.
But this would do.
This is putting $500,000 in.
Putting the 500 into it.
Right, so it's just
It's
the
ultimately coming
opposite.
out of the general fund.
That's the way I read it.
That's what I think,
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Is there a general fund impact to this?
So we have not in the FY24 immediate in the budgetary process for FY24 counted on the money coming over from the direct app yet from the cannabis regulatory fund. It is in law that it would. We were waiting because we wanted to see how we weren't appropriating any dollars. We weren't transferring, we weren't having the 24 carry it at the moment, but it will come out of that. It will have that impact in the end. It just doesn't impact the budget right now. So we were waiting to see how the FY23 closed before we actually determined what the direct app might be in FY24 into the general fund.
Do we carry a number in the direct apps estimates that we're going to get?
We will start to, but we have not started to do that yet in the as the budget is structured right now,
Okay.
it will be a balance. You will be starting to do that in the budget adjustment, because we'll have the July and the January forecast. There was an agreement with the fifth floor in January that we wouldn't count on any cannabis money yet for 24 budget bills.
Okay.
But when you get to it in January, it will be $500,000 less than it otherwise would have been because of this.
And going
But
forward,
because it's a one-time.
If that's, yes,
but going forward from now,
Yeah.
the cannabis fund.
Yeah.
Will have an estimate for direct.
so what will happen for the next 2 years, the excise tax is going into the Cannabis Control Board.
Yep.
You will be faced 2 years out with how to fund the Cannabis Board because their fees do not cover it. But the excise tax will be back in the general fund, and you will have to reconcile that gap that will exist 2 years out in the funding of the control board.
It's supposed to be rolling in dough and we're filling a gap. Huh?
This is classic.
Huh?
I wonder,
The way it usually works.
I mean, it's,
Unless we're missing something here in this.
well, we are, and I think what we're missing is that we're doing all these things. And our profit margin has gone down because of all the things we're doing.
Yes, the net that you are seeing to the rest of the budget is going down as the cost related to the control board and the things that you are asking and desiring to do, and you're applying. So what this means is that, for example, the coalition budgets, the community coalition budgets, that you have half of it in one-time money, and they were thinking that back in January, about 1.4 would be coming in. That's being eroded, 30% of that's being eroded by the lab costs that you've had to incur, and 30% of it will be eroded by this. 30% of this 500 will erode the amount that can go to the coalitions.
So in other words, we're gonna have to, fill the gap to fund the coalition.
Right.
Potentially, yes, in budget adjustment.
I would suggest that we have an amendment that asks the joint fiscal committee to examine this.
It's just a straightforward fund
I
analysis.
understand that, but we thought we were gonna fund all these wonderful after-school programs and stuff. We can't even fund
So
our,
the after school is not on the excise tax, the after school is
It's on
on the
sales
sales tax.
taxes.
So
You're
they did all 6% because
Yeah,
it's taken off.
and that's over in the ed fund, it's not part of this fund structure.
So they're not getting dinged at all.
No,
No,
are you
no,
allowing this now?
it's ultimately the amount of money that we have to support the coalitions. That's what it's gonna come down to. And
yes.
they're costing more than we're gonna have.
They are thinking that they are gonna have 3 million to use in 24. It just, at the moment, it doesn't look like that on the current forecast. I don't know what the status of sales and cannabis look like, compared to the forecast right
Maybe the
now.
only state that loses money on cannabis.
Lose money, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
No, I think we got the money, but we're spending it faster than we can generate.
It is true.
Yeah, but we're spending a lot of it on the control board and all of the stuff, so one could argue we might be losing.
Yeah.
So, this is,
I hope we
so,
don't do that on sports wagering.
Senator Sears, it seems like what this is doing though is addressing the very concern that your committee, member had relative to the social equity applicants. So, does, someone want to make a motion?
I already did,
Oh, you already did?
yeah, and
Senator Sears put his hand up.
be second.
You just have to raise your hand and you get written down. It's doing something.
Yeah.
Because our clerk
Okay.
is on top.
Yeah, our clerk is very
Well,
efficient.
most of you, when I'm writing down here, going, woo-hoo,
All right, so will the clerk please call the roll?
Lyons,
Yes.
Firstly,
Yes.
Sears,
Skip somebody.
skip anybody,
Caparu.
I didn't hear it.
you were listening.
Yes.
Dar,
Yes.
yes, Mitchell. And who's reporting this, is this Sears?
I'm in charge of sin.
Well, apparently it's not as profitable as we thought.
Well, when we get into,
Sin never pays.
There's another area we'll cover.
It must be too much, under the table kind of exchange, huh?
That
All
must
right.
be because.
So now we're down to, 217, thank you very much, Mike, which we're not ready to take up yet.
We aren't at that.
No, I don't think we do we, Stephanie? No, I don't think
That
so.
canoe is
No,
gonna get
okay.
bigger.
So,
It's gonna be a pregnant canoe.
I thought Senator Baruth didn't vote because I didn't hear it. Maybe it's me.
I voted so clearly.
I heard you.
You said no.
You went like
You
this.
said no.
We wanna
That's what I
do
thought.
conference.
Was it 7-0-0?
I don't know,
That's unanimous.
You're lucky you
And,
voted
and
right.
I,
The problem is I'm not gonna be able to say de minimis on the floor.
This committee is, I'm gonna adjourn, we may have to come back on H217. So I want you to, hang around. The question is, do we wanna go to a committee of conference at this point? What we're still working with is what is happening on the other side with childcare and, the nexus it has with the budget. And so, our ability to finish up our committee of conference is kind of in limbo, to be honest. And so I'm going to, take this committee off live now, take a recess, and we're gonna have to consider, when we have an amendment ready to go on 217, that we're here to take action on it. So, please, stay around. And, we will,
like, will it be a half an hour or?
I don't know, it all depends on when we get it drafted.
Do you have my cell number?
So what I'm gonna do is adjourn